Hello everybody, and big welcome to this webinar. Today's topic is CloudScan. We are very happy to have everybody here. My name is Hjorth, and I will be your host for today. My role within Tradeshift is to be head of global sales, and I'm also very happy that I have my colleague Mikkel Hippe Brun, who is a co-founder and CSO of Tradeshift with me here today. Besides his role as heading up strategy, Mikkel is also in charge of our CloudScan product team. CloudScan is a key technology for Tradeshift, and it's really key that we have one of our co-founders as heading up that team, because we believe that CloudScan is a technology that can significantly change the dynamics of the electronic invoicing industry. But a lot more about that during the next hour. So if we look at today's agenda, it is very simple. We have 4 topics. So I'll start out by giving you a short introduction into Tradeshift and some insights into our business cloud. Then Mikkel will do an introduction into CloudScan, and then of course a demo of the actual product. Then we'll finalize the session with a summary and a question and answer session. So if you have any questions during the session, we hope that you do, and we will be happy to answer any questions towards the end. On the right to your screen on the control panel, there is a question button, and you can post any of your questions during the session, and we'll do our utmost to cover any of the questions during the session. So let's kick it off. So a little bit about Tradeshift. So we are an organization that launched in 2010, and back then we had a very clear vision. So the vision of Tradeshift is really to connect as many businesses in one big global network as possible, to allow businesses to really change the way that they do business today by exchanging all sorts of different documents online. So if you look at what we are really striving for, it is to connect businesses of all sizes. So far, a lot of the business networks has been focusing on connecting large businesses in a business network, but we are trying to connect both large to large, small to small, and also large to small. And we do that because there's a lot of cost to be saved on both sides when optimizing this process. And also there's an opportunity for both parties to optimize working capital going forward, and that goes for big as well as small organizations. So why should you really care about this issue? Well, the challenge is that today a lot of all the invoices and orders that are being exchanged are still being exchanged on paper. It is actually more than 300 million documents that are on a daily basis exchanged between companies in the terms of on the paper. And of course there is a lot of errors taking part in this process, and it's a very, very costly process. So we have been trying to tackle this problem from various angles for many, many years. It all started out in the 80s and the 90s, especially within retail. Electronic data interchange really took off, and even though there was a lot of cost, by being very tough on these suppliers and demanding them to use this, this industry actually managed to get relatively high onboarding rates. Then if you moved onwards, then scanning became also widespread. And when the first electronic invoicing networks appeared, it was really announced to be the death of scanning. But what soon realized, what companies realized, was that e-invoicing still had a lot of challenges, and it was difficult to convince companies to onboard. And there were several reasons for that. First of all, there was probably something with the commercial model, and a lot of the focus had for a long time been on the buyer side, so there was not really a lot of attention and the care on the supplier side, both in terms of the business model, but also in terms of what processes needed to be changed in order to really make this widespread. So what the reality is today is that even though a lot of companies have been trying to do electronic invoicing, they have not really reached the onboarding rates that they anticipated. So still today there's a lot of scanning happening in most organizations. And you know, most people know what the challenges are with the scanning, but with Tradeshift we really see that there is an opportunity to innovate in this space and to make it possible to use scanning as an easy way into electronic invoicing. So what we did when we launched in 2010 was really to change a little bit of the focus in the industry, to move it away from the buyers to say, well, all the attention should be on the supplier side, because if we manage to build solutions that are workable for the suppliers, then at the end of the day, the business case on the buyer side will be much better. So what we have done is to remove cost. We have already now, after a few years in the industry, managed to prove industry best onboarding rates that are significantly better than any other provider in the market, because we make it easy for the suppliers to connect to a Tradeshift. So we don't really regard Tradeshift as an electronic invoicing network, but more as the invoice, as being the carrier, the basis to grow an electronic business network. And by that we have the possibility to extend apps on our platform and to offer financial apps also on the platform. So if you look at this curve, which really is the relation between the number of invoices and the vendor base, then historically you would see this as being a very separated graph. So you would have the traditional networks far to the left, because this was where the business case would be okay for the vendor, or at least there was enough pressure from a significantly important customer to ask the supplier to onboard a given network, even though they would incur massive costs. But then as you move towards the right on the curve, then the widespread of electronic invoicing networks became very limited. And then as you go all the way to the right, then most suppliers will then today send paper, and you would have to go through a cumbersome scanning process. What we're doing at Tradeshift is that we view this as an integrated process, and our approach is completely integrated. So we offer a lot of different channels depending on what size and what type of vendor you're dealing with, because it needs to be attractive and it needs to be possible for suppliers of any size to submit electronically. And this is exactly where we have launched CloudScan, to be yet an additional channel on top of what we already offer to the supplier to submit electronically. So why is it that e-invoicing kind of hasn't lived up to the promise? We did a survey back in December last year, where we surveyed 600 CFOs, and it was a bit worrying that only 12% were happy with the uptake that they had in the current setup. Most of them mentioned that cost was definitely a key part of it. We were at a conference last week where it was a bit surprising that a supplier mentioned in his presentation that the worst cost issue he has had was a high value invoice, where he would have to pay as much as $9,000 to submit that invoice electronically. Now that is of course not something that is widely spread, but it happens. But I think what it overall shows is that cost is definitely an issue, and when suppliers decide to onboard or to keep on sending paper or even emails, then cost is absolutely a key part of it. It is not the only one, and I think that the other major issue is, of course, what kind of barriers, how complex is it for the suppliers to submit electronically. And I think that what we try to do is to look at both areas, both cost and also making it easy. And then it was not a big surprise that, of course, close to 50% said that without widespread uptake, it is more or less pointless to move into electronic invoicing. So when we look at this survey, what is it that we then do from Tradeshift's side to really try to make or to tackle some of these problems within the industry? Well, the first one is that we have made it free. And this is not just a marketing trick. I think what many companies may see is that, yeah, Tradeshift just makes it free. But I think that what is behind that is a very, very deliberate choice right from the start to be able to engineer a platform that is completely software as a service cloud-based to make it possible to offer transactions free of charge. So this is really at the core of what Tradeshift does really well. We are a technology company, and challenges in the industry are, from a Tradeshift point of view, tackled with innovations that can make things easier. So being able to offer electronic invoicing free on the supplier side is absolutely key, because we don't believe that there are any other model that will help us get to the onboarding rates as we're all looking to, and that most industry analysts are saying that electronic invoicing will be widespread within the next 3 to 5 years, and that will really be a significant uptake. But we simply don't see that happening if we don't focus on the suppliers and we don't think about the business models and the technologies that we offer to the suppliers to make it easy. So that brings me to the next point, which is really about making it easy. We believe that it's absolutely key that we focus on the different segments, and we are very smart about how to address the different segments with innovations and technologies that make it exactly fit what they're looking for. So if they're willing to change their process and to hook into a network, that makes sense if you have higher volumes. But if you don't have high volumes, then you could either use a portal. But if you're already used to being able to submit your invoice in an email with an attachment, and you view that as electronic invoicing, then we believe that we should be smart about making the conversion from their interpretation of submitting electronically to the interpretation of the buyer, where they want to receive a structured XML file. And this is really what this webinar is going to explain, how we can solve that. Finally, a key thing is to make it easy for you as a buyer to engage your vendor base, because this is not only about a handful or a couple of hundred suppliers that have very high volumes. This is about connecting to suppliers of any size. So we're talking about thousands, tens of thousands, and in some cases hundreds of thousands of suppliers that we need to address and to onboard electronic invoicing. And you simply cannot do that with technologies of the past, where it was a very manual process. You need to build software that can automate this entire process, and that is the third bullet that we have done, so we can engage a mass number of suppliers at the same time. So the final slide that I want to show is around our business cloud. So this is really what we're selling. This is our products. So if you start at the upper right corner under invoicing, then this is absolutely electronic invoicing. This is the ability for the buyer to receive a structured data format. If you move then clockwise towards the network engagement tools, then this is, as I said, the tool that helps you as a buyer to update and to communicate and to onboard vendors onto the network. I'll skip CloudScan because this is what Mikkel will go through. But also on the platform, we have the possibility to support other document types, so purchase orders. That is one of them. So we can distribute and to flip purchase orders. We have the ability to map branches. This is absolutely key in the network. So you as a buyer are able to put your legal entities on the network, so they're visible for the suppliers, to make sure that they can submit the invoice to the right legal entity within your organization. Business firewall is a key component of the platform. It basically allows you to set up any validation rule that the supplier would have to validate their invoices against, and only once they have been validated, they will be passed on. So what that basically means for you is that there will be a much higher data quality in the invoices that you received, because they have already been validated and only been passed on to you once they are approved by the business firewall. Mikkel will also discuss this in much more detail. Then of course we do archiving. We have vendor master management, so the ability for suppliers to maintain their own master data, and you can subscribe to that master data. And then on top of the platform, these are really the core aspects. Then we have the possibility to run financial apps that can optimize cash flow on the supplier side and on your side also. This is key to have those elements on the platform, because this is not only about removing barriers, this is also about making it attractive for suppliers to submit electronically. So if you're in a situation where you can get paid early at discount rates that are attractive to you as an organization, this is an additional incentive to move on to electronic invoicing. And finally, on the customer apps, Tradeshift is a completely open platform. Other third-party organizations can integrate and to run their applications on the platform, and you as a buyer can add other processes on top of the platform. So what we as a company really enable you to do is to connect real-time with suppliers of any size. That real-time connectivity can then be leveraged to roll out other processes on top of electronic invoicing. But it starts with the electronic invoicing, because that is the document that will in the end get you to an electronic handshake with a vast majority of the vendor base that you do business with on a daily basis. So with that, I will basically pass over presenter rights to my colleague Mikkel, Hippe, Brun, who will then take you through a presentation of CloudScan and a demo of CloudScan. Over to you, Mikkel.
Thank you very much, Christian. A little bit about CloudScan. It's basically building on some of the traditional technologies that many of you are familiar with, using OCR and data capture to convert paper-based invoices or PDF invoices to a format that you could read into your ERP system. So this is technology that's been around for 20, 30 years, and many of you are also familiar with the pains of this process, where you need to validate the data conversion in your accounts payable department, and then look at Christian, could you just mute? I'm getting a little bit of feedback. And then you're allowed to import into your ERP system. But most often this is done at the header and footer level, and if you try and embark on line level data capture, you will find that this is even more costly and error prone than just simple header footer level data capture. So really taking advantage of two-way and three-way matching in this process can be very, very difficult. So the idea with CloudScan is to use the same core technology to do the OCR and data capture. Your vendor will submit an invoice as a PDF document via email, send it to an email address of Tradeshift, a CloudScan email address, and then the vendor will get an email back asking the vendor to validate the data capture that has taken place. And there are several advantages to this. First of all, it's not you that do the actual validation. It's the vendor himself, and also the invoice must pass the validation rules that we have specified for you as a buyer. So some of these validation rules could be mandatory purchase order numbers or cost centers or similar elements that you as a buyer have as a requirement for valid invoices in your organization. So all in all, the vendor will make sure that the data is of the correct data quality, and then once it's validated, it will be sent to you as a buyer. So you will receive high quality data that you can import directly to your ERP system. So that's the basic concept of CloudScan. So, but just to give you an idea of other options for integrating with Tradeshift, you can connect your suppliers in many different ways, and CloudScan is just one way to connect, especially the long tail of small suppliers that are not inclined to use one of our off-the-shelf connectors, or use a file transfer, or integrate using our programming interface, our API. And there are also some other custom ways of doing it. So this is a way to really get the uptake up and the volume of invoices up when you onboard your suppliers really quickly, because most suppliers, they can send a PDF document to you as a buyer. And also a key in this diagram is that everything is, of course, archived, both what the supplier sends in to you as a buyer and what you have as a buyer. It's two separate archives. Everything is digitally signed and archived and stored for 10 years. Everything can be audited. It's a requirement that an external auditor can get access to your archive and validate that everything is correct in this process. And it's basically the same interfaces that you have as a buyer for integration. So it's basically, as I say, the same tools that we offer to buyers and suppliers, because a supplier to you would also be a buyer from his supply chain. So it's a rippling effect. So again, just to reiterate how CloudScan works, basically you just you issue an email address to your supplier that they use for sending you the PDF invoices. It's not only PDF invoices, it could also be scanned images. And there are two options. You can use a generic email address, or you could use a specific email address. And I'll get back to the difference between these two email addresses and the pros and cons of this. Then CloudScan takes over and does the OCR and data capture, processes it into XML. The vendor or the supplier gets the email and a request to validate the data. And once it's validated, it's sent to you. Very, very, very simple process. And speaking more about validation, which is one of the key advantages of the Tradeshift platform, we have, as Christian mentioned, the business firewall. So the purpose of the business firewall is to prevent invalid invoices from being sent to you as a buyer. So you are in control of what validation rules you want implemented on the platform. So this could be valid purchase order numbers issued to a specific supplier, or it could also just be an open list of purchase order numbers. Could be different combinations of cost centers, person references, etc. So it's very configurable, it's dynamic, so we use your data to do the validation. And also we have support for something we call supplier groups, so it allows you to group your suppliers and say that for this particular supplier group, these validation rules should be in place, but for indirect suppliers, another group, then you would have more lean validation rules. And when you know this, then it becomes also apparent the advantages of if you expose a generic email address to all your suppliers, then you don't really know who you're communicating with, and you don't really know what validation rules that should be put in place. So then everything sent to the generic email address would be validated with the standard validation rules. Whereas if you issue a specific email address to each vendor, then we know who the vendor is, and we know what validation rules that are appropriate for this vendor. So there are many advantages to the second approach. and it's basically optional if you want also to allow vendors to use the generic email address or not. So you're in full control here. So if we look at it, what are the key advantages of CloudScan if you compare it to traditional OCR and data capture? First of all, it's the supplier validation step. The supplier signs off on the conversion into an electronic format. And it's not only a burden to the supplier, it's actually a huge advantage to the supplier that he has some comfort that the invoice will be accepted within your organization. So everything, all the formal things around the correct PO number and things like that are in order. So the supplier may need to add information that was not on the original PDF or scanned invoice. But it's good that they get this information up front and can get the data and send it in. And then there's, of course, the cost aspect of this. So every invoice validated by a supplier is one less invoice for you to validate. And finally, also, of course, the data quality, the business firewall will prevent invalid invoices from being submitted. And that's also in the best interest of the supplier, that it doesn't take 2 to 3 weeks before he will get a response back that, sorry, we could not accept your invoice because of a missing PO number. So it gives some comfort for the supplier that it will actually be paid more promptly. And then we also see this as a first step towards real e-invoicing. As Christian said initially, Gartner and others say that e-invoicing will be mainstream within 3 to 5 years. And we want to allow your suppliers to move from an initial step, which could be the PDF or scanned invoices sent to you via CloudScan. But then as they mature, they would want to connect directly with their ERP system and send invoices to you and other buyers that they have on the Tradeshift network. So there are basically 2 ways where you can use CloudScan. There is the supplier validation way, as I've explained before. But of course, that may not capture all the invoices that you receive as a large buyer. Depending on how hard you are on your suppliers, and if you're willing to sort of set a deadline, you will receive paper invoices for an interim period. And you can, of course, also scan these invoices yourself and send them to CloudScan for conversion. But then the validation will take place in your own accounts payable department or in your shared service center. So this solution is very comparable to traditional OCR and data capture solutions as they exist out there. But it allows us to capture 100% of the invoices coming in. So that's the main benefit of this other option. And then I'm sure that some of you have some questions in regards to the legal implications of all of this. And there are basically 2 options that you have as a buyer. You can decide that the PDF invoice will remain the legal invoice no matter that it went through a CloudScan process and that the supplier actually validated the data capture. But in this form, the captured and validated data is just data. It's something that you can book in your ERP system, and the XML data is, so to speak, informative, whereas the PDF document is the legal invoice and should be used when disputes arises or your auditor needs to look at the document. And I also want to add in that as a feature on our business firewall, we also have the ability to reject invoices, PDF invoices that are received without a valid electronic signature. So that could be one of the automatic rejections that a supplier would get using CloudScan. The other option is to use the captured XML data as the legal invoice. In order to do this, you need your supplier to accept an EDI agreement. Basically, the supplier will have to accept the terms and conditions of Tradeshift and formally register on Tradeshift as a supplier to you. This is not required in the first instance. And then the captured and validated data becomes normative, or it becomes the legal document. And then the PDF document is simply an attachment to the XML data. And it is the XML data that would be used for handling disputes and for your auditors to look at. The PDF document will still be available for yourself and for the auditors in addition to the XML data. And then we use OCR techniques and data capture techniques that are familiar to many of you. We know ourselves the pain of these tools, and they are still not perfect. And that's why we also give you a quality guarantee on our process. So as we train CloudScan with your invoices and use different techniques to do this, all the invoices will be checked by an operator just to ensure that the OCR and data capture is of acceptable data quality before we send it to your vendor for his validation. So for the first 6 months of operation, a lot of learning algorithms will be working on your invoices, and CloudScan will learn to handle the invoices from your vendor base. And after 6 months, we can sort of take the operator out of the loop, and we do that based on the validation, the business firewall validations we have. So we actually can see if the data quality is acceptable. And some of these invoices will also be checked by an operator after the 6 months period. And just to ensure that the data quality remains intact and is not lowered, we also do a survey with your vendor base to see that they're actually satisfied with the data capture that we do. And that's our guarantee to you that the supplier satisfaction will not decrease after the 6 months. And in regards to how quickly will your supplier get the invoice back for his validation, the SLA is no higher than 6 hours, but normally it's much lower. If it's invoices that has been that are known, or invoice layouts that are known by the system, then we're talking about minutes and not hours. And then I would like to move on to a short demo. So what I would like to show you now is the onboarding of a supplier to a company called Hippe. It's a Dutch company, and I would now like to sign up as a supplier to CloudScan and send PDF invoices to Hippe. I will switch over to a browser here. So this is the live system. I'm using our sandbox solution because Hippe is not a real company, and we don't expose fake companies on the Tradeshift network. So that's why the URL is a little different. So basically, there's a small video that the supplier can get a quick introduction to how CloudScan works and how the user interface is built up. Then they sign up, and I'm going to imitate being a company called The Cleaning Guy. And I have a VAT number. So this is a VAT number. And then I enter the email address where I would like to receive the validation emails. So this is in the Netherlands, and a quick address. And it's in The Hague. So I save details and proceed. And then the next step here is I've done my registration, and I'm now issued with a unique email address here. So this is the email address that I will use from here on when I communicate with Hippe. Whenever I send a PDF or a scanned invoice to Hippe, this is the email address I should use. So there are basically two options. I could enter this email address into my invoicing solution, so it happens automatically directly from the invoicing solution, or I could use my email program. Oops. And then I'll just say it's invoice. I will attach a file. And then I'm basically ready to go. So now I've sent a document away to CloudScan, and this will take some minutes before I will get a response back. So I have pre-cooked another invoice for you, so you can see how the validation step happens. So I have another invoice here that I sent earlier on today. And this invoice basically says that the invoice that you send to Hippe must be validated before it can be delivered. And again, it's a simple email response I get back from CloudScan. I push this link, and I'm checking into a simple view where I have the PDF document on the top, and I have the captured data at the bottom. So now it's up for me as a supplier to check that everything is okay. You'll probably notice that we have not really captured your own data because we've already registered all of this. So we know who the receiver is, and we know who the buyer is in the transaction. So the focus on the data capture is at the line level and the payment dates and things like that. So everything seems to be in order in this one, but I do have the option to change stuff, to add information at the header level or at the line level. So I could add a purchase order number here to the information that I submit. This could be at the header level. I also have the option of doing it at the line level. There's many different fields that can be added to the line level in this instance. But right now, I'm actually I'm happy with the data conversion here, and I will simply just say validate. And then once I hit the validate button, the whole invoice will be checked up against Hippe's validation rules. And if everything is in order and the document has been delivered to Hippe, then I get my my confirmation as a supplier. So all of my interaction happens using my inbox, and I also get a confirmation that it was sent and that everything is in order. So this is sort of a quick run through of how CloudScan works for suppliers. So yeah, I think I can just, this is basically the same thing I have here. This was the invoice that we sent off, the validation screens that we saw. So basically, the supplier will get an email for every invoice that he sends in, and it's also, so we've had the question before, so what if I send many invoices? Will I then get many emails back to validate? And yes, that's true. So we are also, in a way, forcing the supplier to confirm that everything is okay, even if it's an invoice layout that we know that we can do data capture on before. We want the sign-off from the supplier in this process. So, Christian, I think I'll give the word over to you again.
All right, thank you very much. So let's just look at the short summary here. So I just wanted to very briefly explain how the pricing model works. Okay, so the way that we price Tradeshift is a subscription fee, and we basically have three layers in the pricing model. So first you would license the platform, which has everything to do with the ability to send out invoicing, do the branch management, all that stuff. So the base platform. And on top of that, then you buy the actual CloudScan engine, and there are other options on top. So if you want to do the financial services, if you want to do master data, and so on. And then you buy the number of invoices, and on top of that, then there is a layer which is the actual project management and the onboarding of the suppliers. So as I mentioned, this is a annual subscription fee. But what we do in order to get going really fast is that we know that one of the challenges in the electronic invoicing industry is that there are concerns about going for a massive project. And in order for us to really do this quick and easy, then we have a scaled down version of the CloudScan that we can offer. It's a bundled offer of the 25,000 invoices that you do, and it is including the onboarding service, and it has all the core elements of the platform. So the output formats, the VAT stuff, the business firewall. Obviously, there are not the same amount of possibilities in order to set up business rules, but it is sufficient to test that the technology works. So what we really do is put our money where our mouth is, because we are not afraid to, proudly say that this stuff really works. So this is an invitation for you to really test out CloudScan and Tradeshift as a platform in a separate part of your business, where you can do that very fast. So a final summary slide of what we have discussed today is really that the way that we see this, the way that we see the CloudScan engine and the technology around CloudScan is that it for the supplier side really lowers the barriers towards electronic invoicing. So for you, what that means is that the onboarding rates you will be able to achieve, even the industry best onboarding rates that Tradeshift has been able to prove in the past, are going to be improved even further with the CloudScan engine, because we can address suppliers that have been used to send out emails with attached invoices or even paper invoices today. The only thing you need to convince the suppliers about is that they need to send an email with an attached invoice. If you do that, then it will be treated exactly as a full electronic invoicing invoice in your backend system. And then it's the first step towards real e-invoicing, because what you're in essence doing is that you're converting paper suppliers into light electronic invoicing. Now, as I said, and as Mikkel has stressed, there's no difference in the quality of the electronic invoice you would receive, whether it is an invoice that is originated as a paper invoice or it's in direct XML output from your vendor's finance system. it is the exact same quality because of the business firewall and because of the validation step. Now what then will happen is that over time, of course, the supplier and as the market matures within electronic invoicing, it is very easy for the supplier to get a connector between their finance system and then Tradeshift, and then move into full electronic invoicing where they don't need to go through the additional step of accepting the invoice. And again, moving over to the data quality, I think it is absolutely clear that the biggest difference between normal OCR and normal scanning and then this stuff is that the data quality is significantly better. All the validation happens on the supplier side, and that means that the data quality you would receive will be much, much better. And it is in the interest of the supplier to make sure that they perform the validation step, because at the end of the day, what is going to happen today is if the scanning you do is poor, then the validation step on your side is going to take longer, and that delay will in many instances mean that the supplier will get paid later. So now they're suddenly in control in terms of validating and making sure that the invoice can enter smooth into your finance system. And if you just look at the cost side, then it's clear that the cost of using CloudScan is significantly lower than any other scanning setup where you would have to buy hardware and so on. You would have to run the entire setup internally. You could of course outsource that, but that doesn't change the underlying fundamentals of the cost. Then it's just outsourced, right? And then there's the other step, which is really all about the validations that are being performed right now on a year-end. So all those validations will now be moved over to the supplier side. So that basically concludes the presentation, and now we'll open up for questions, and I will try to see some of the questions that came in here.
Christian, I have an overview of some of the questions here.
Yeah, exactly.
So people are requesting if the PowerPoint slides will be available after this this webinar.
Yes, absolutely. We will be in touch. We know who have asked for the presentations, and we will reach out for them one-to-one, and we can make those slides available for people. Yes. I have one question for you, Mikkel, which is really regarding the actual digital storage, if that is in-house, and what privacy and data security measures Tradeshift takes to safeguard such data. Could you give an answer to that question?
Yes. So since Tradeshift is based on cloud infrastructure, the requirements to data security and integrity and our ability to recover in case of any unforeseen situations are extremely high. So basically, we've been audited against the ISAE 3402 international standard. It's equivalent to SAS 70. We've had auditors drill down our whole infrastructure for several weeks, just to ensure that everything is in the correct order. So we have an ISAE report that we can give people on request that details exactly how we store everything and how we make sure that the integrity is intact. But the short answer is that it's a multi-tenant cloud infrastructure where we have full control over where your data is stored. So if you're based in the US, the data would be stored in the US availability zone, and if you're based in Europe, it would be stored in Europe. But please reach out to us if you want to have more information on the security of our platform. We know this is a very important question to every big buyer out there. So Christian, maybe a question to you. There have been some questions around what the cost is to suppliers for CloudScan.
Yeah, and building upon that question, there was another one, which really was if there is a difference in the supplier cost depending on what kind of channel they would use, whether they would be integrated or use the web or use CloudScan. And it's a very easy question to answer because the cost is absolutely zero. So in everything Tradeshift does, there is no cost on the supplier side, whether you use any of the channels. You can, of course, we have commercial connectors to Oracle, SAP, and these kind of systems, and you can buy those, but there are always free alternatives. So our API is completely open, and you can always integrate, use FTP upload or any of the other channels completely free. So the quick answer is on the supplier side, it is absolutely free. So the next question, then Mikkel, goes to you. There's a question regarding compliance. I know you have touched upon that in one of the slides, but could you just re-emphasize anybody who has concerns regarding compliance and VAT rules?
Yes. So we have compliance reports covering Europe, North America, Hong Kong, Singapore, and a few other countries. So basically, upon enterprise request, we work with our auditors to issue a compliance report and validate our compliance in these new territories where we do structured onboarding. So even though Tradeshift is used in 190 countries, it doesn't mean that we are compliant in all 190 countries. We are compliant in the countries where we have structured onboarding campaigns of suppliers to our enterprise customers. So we extend the list of countries in which we are compliant on a request basis and focused on our growth.
Very good. And a follow-up question regarding PDF invoices across countries in Europe. Are there any concerns when sending a PDF invoice across border in Europe?
So you should be looking at the requirements within your own country to see if you can accept a PDF invoice. So, but fortunately, the new VAT legislation from the European Commission will be implemented by January next year. So that means the requirements are significantly lowered for compliant electronic invoicing. So it's a principle of equal treatment between paper and electronic formats. So you have the option of just applying the sound validation rules that you have to employ when you use paper invoices. So do you know your customer or your supplier? Can you do a two-way or three-way matching? Then you've had a good process in place, and you know your auditor will accept paper invoices as well as electronic invoices, that being XML data or PDF invoices, signed or unsigned.
Thank you, Mikkel. A question regarding the difference between PO and non-PO invoices. How do we work with those in CloudScan?
So basically, you would make a decision on what suppliers you would ask to submit PO invoices. So they would be in a separate supplier group, and then perhaps for indirect suppliers where there are no POs, they would be in a separate supplier group. So you can control that with the supplier groups and the business firewall.
Good. And a question regarding, from a supplier point of view, do they have the option to see all their invoices pending their approval through a portal, or do they have to look at the invoices or the emails? Sorry?
So if the supplier decides to register on Tradeshift rather than just using it purely as email and PDF, then they have the option to look at the invoices and also see status updates from buyers that chooses to inform their suppliers of status updates. So we have a very detailed a state solution where you can see if an invoice has been accepted, paid, rejected, the reason for rejections, etc. And you will also get notifications via email if you're not registered on the Tradeshift platform, but you're just using the email-based solution.
Okay. There's a question here. Do you have to schedule regular updates of ERP system data from the buyer system into CloudScan?
If you want to maintain an up-to-date business firewall with open PO numbers and their relation to a specific vendor, then you need to do updates in a batch job, maybe once every day or twice a day, depending on your needs. So yes, it's a very a good thing to do if you want a strong business firewall protecting you from receiving invoices that are not valid.
Yeah. Okay. Then there have been a few questions regarding the reaction of the suppliers if they really want to do the validation step. Could you talk a little bit about what the feedback has been from the suppliers so far?
I think you have to look at this, that the suppliers actually have a lot of benefits out of this process, because we do capture a lot of validation errors in the business firewall. You know, for some of our customers, it's close to 1/3 of all invoices being received that are rejected for one reason or another. And if you can give that information up front to the vendor, that it was not a valid PO number, or it was missing, or the invoice was rejected for some other reason, that's really actually a very good thing for the supplier, because they can correct the problem, and they can submit it, and they can know that they will hopefully get paid on time. You know, there's not any formal things preventing the buyer from paying the invoice, and they get the receipt back that it was actually received, and there's no dispute over when it was received or not. So, you know, we do provide benefits also for the supplier. So, but of course, you will find some suppliers that would you know, ignore the email or forget about it, and we do send reminders out that they should remember to validate the invoice, because it won't be sent unless they validate it.
Very good. I think it's time for the two final questions. So one of them is, besides the PDF format, what other formats do you support? JPEG, TIFF, or
yes, all of the scanned image formats you can imagine are handled in there. Okay.
And then there is a final question, which is really regarding the network engagement tool. So the question really goes, how do you see the network engagement tool work in terms of CloudScan? And I think that the question is really all about, when we use the engagement tool, do we offer other options than CloudScan to a potential supplier?
So yes, the network engagement tool will present your suppliers for a range of options for sending invoices to you as a buyer. So CloudScan is just one of the options that is offered to the supplier, and based on your master data, we can actually issue the unique email address directly in that onboarding email that we send out. So what I showed you today was a self-registration process where the supplier registered for a unique email address himself. But the alternative is that you just issue the unique email address using the supplier engagement tool, and this is actually the recommended way of doing this, because then there's no registration at all for the supplier.
Very good, thank you very much, Mikkel. But that basically concludes the presentation today. We have been on air now for 1 hour. So with that, I just want to thank everybody for participating and just remind you that there is a new webinar coming up on the 8th of August, which is regarding fast track. So we're going to walk you through what fast track really means, not only for CloudScan, but for basically any of the services that Tradeshift provides. So if you want more information regarding that, you can go to tradeshift.com/webinars, and we also encourage you to look at tradeshift.com/enterprise for more information. And for all the participants who have asked for the presentations, we have noted those questions, and we will get back to you one-to-one regarding that. So with that, I want to thank you for participating, and hope to see you again online for our next webinar on the 8th of August. Thank you very much.